I saw Bigfoot. I saw Nessie. Just kidding. I saw the Indiana Pacers from 2023-24 tonight. They smoked the Bulls. Their offense looks good. How did they do it? Can they carry this forward? And what was important? We'll get to it all today on a Weekend Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy weekend and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes, and today, as you can see and maybe hear, it's echoey, I'm in the basement of the United Center, where a game just happened, and the Pacers, believe it or not, won. They went on the road and won for the first time in a month, beating Chicago on their own floor. Nice scheduling for the Pacers. Bulls run it back-to-back, but nice game from the Pacers because they played like the Pacers. It's so weird that that's the takeaway, but it is. They looked great offensively in this game, making a crap ton of threes will do that, but it wasn't even just that, and I'm going to explain why it was much more than that, and the Pacers did a good job explaining why it was much more than that at this game and after this game. Talking about a lot of stuff, and can they keep this alive in my own other opinion from this game that I asked Rick Carlisle about postgame. So, Pacers win. That obviously is important for them. They need lots of those. They're 10-14 now, 132-123 the final score. Other note, finally, we can stop talking about this stat. By we, I mean me. The Pacers won without the game being within 5 points for the final 5 minutes for the first time this season. That's their first win in their first 10 that did not require clutch time. It got close. Nikola Vucevic had a three-pointer chance when they were down 8 to make it 5. He missed. Pacers immediately scored and went up 11, and that was it. That was that. So the standout number to most should be 132. And giving up 123 isn't good. The Bulls were hot from 3. The Pacers were much hotter. We'll get to that in a second. That's part of getting to 132. 132, Pacers tied for third best game this season in scoring. The other two being overtime against Boston, so regulation was still less than that. And the Dallas game, which is still, to me, probably their best wire-to-wire game. Maybe this one, actually, but I would still say Dallas. Of the season, that regulation game against Boston, they had 124 in regulation, and they won that one. So the Pacers, for the season, if they score more than 121 points, undefeated, 4-0. They did that a ton last year. An absolute ton, right? That was their thing. They would give up 115 to 125, but they scored so much it didn't matter. Last year's Pacers, who won 47 games, scored more than 121 points 49 times, right? That's unbelievable. That's well over half. This was just their fourth time in 24 games this season doing exactly that. But when they score, they're really good. They're hard to beat. When they get over 120, they're 5-1. Right? Clearly a mark there. They have not won a game when they score under 114, which has happened 8 times. That's a third of their season. So there's obviously a lot to scoring. Duh. It's basketball. That's the point. You're trying to put points on the scoreboard. But last year's Pacers scored so much. That was their identity. That's how they won. And the hope was that for them and for fans, they would score a little bit more, maybe the same, but defend a little better. And that hasn't happened. Tonight, they scored a lot of points. So the key thing here, this was the best by percentage shooting night of the season for any team. 18 for 29 from 3 were the Pacers. Unbelievable shooting. Everybody who took a 3 except for Jarris Walker made over half of their threes in this game. I'm so sorry to Jarris Walker, who went 1 for 3. Johnny Furphy made his only 3. TJ McConnell made his only 3. Obi Toppin was 3 for 4. Tyrese Haliburton was 5 for 9. Myles Turner was 3 for 5, as was Pascal Siakam. And Ben Mathurin was 1 for 1. That's insane. I kind of feel bad for the Bulls in a way because of that. The Bulls were on fire. Every quarter but the fourth, the Bulls were 0 for 8 from 3 in the second quarter. They were 21 for 42 otherwise, 50% of 42 attempts in the other 3 quarters. They were also on fire. They made 9 of 17 in the first quarter. Both 9 and 17 are insane numbers, but the Pacers shot much better than them. So obviously, a little bit of this high number is that, but it's not everything. In fact, it's not even close. Because to me, the process of the Pacers tonight stood out just as much, if not more, than the result. Because on a night like that, where they make 18 threes on such few attempts, you'd expect that to be so much of what they did. They only took 29 threes of their 92 shots in this game. So 63 attempts inside the arc, only 12 free throws, which is not a good thing. But they dominated with the best kinds of shots. 56 points in the paint is incredible. You combine that with 18 made threes, That's over 100 points from just the paint and threes. You add in 10 free throws, you're almost to the 132 already. They were getting the shots that they want to get, that every team wants to get. In fact, I'll be a little generous with what counts as the paint, but just looking at the Pacers shot chart, it looks like they had 5 makes this whole game that were non-paint twos. Everything else was a paint 2 or a 3. That's their shots, and I'm guessing most of those were from Pascal Siakam, who should be taking those. He's very good at them. So an excellent game for the Pacers, not only because they were on fire from deep, but also because they attacked the rim and got the shots they wanted. And that's how you get to 132 points, is you play a team that allows you to play fast. And some of this was credit to the Pacers in their best quarter of this game, that second quarter. I believe the Bulls only scored 19 in that second quarter. Yes, 19. Their zone defense was working really well, getting stops. Pacers would run, and they would get the shots they wanted. Everybody felt involved. They were all touching the ball. They were scoring well. The Pacers' worst scoring quarter of this game was 29. And Caitlin Cooper pointed this out well, like it just becomes a feedback loop. You get a stop, then you score because you're running in the open floor. You can play with pace because you get a stop. And because you score, you can now settle into a zone or settle into whatever defense you want, and it just keeps building on itself. And that's exactly what happened in that second quarter. The rest of the game, fairly even, if not slightly in favor of the Bulls, but that style did last for much of the night. And the Pacers have to be happy that they had a game like this offensively. How did they actually do it, right? What allowed them to, besides the Bulls not being a very good defensive team, what allowed them to play like this? Because they've played other bad defensive teams this year and decidedly not looked like this offensively, right? It's not just that they played a bad defense, even though even though many will want to just go that way. That's not it, right? They didn't look this good on offense against the Wizards or the Pelicans. They just played the 24th ranked defense, the Nets, and scored 90 points, right? Just because the Bulls are bad on defense has meant nothing for the Pacers this year. What we learned today that stands out to me as a potentially huge thing for the Pacers going forward is that Rick Carlisle said this morning or earlier in the day, whenever it specifically was, is not important. The Pacers had their shoot around, and it was one of, if not the longest Carlisle can remember since his stint rejoining the team as head coach for this current stint. And they really wanted to lock in on their offensive style and how they want to play. And more importantly here, the spacing elements. Because when the spacing is correct, timing, cutting, screening, drives, everything is easier. And then when you add on to that, much better decision-making, which the Pacers had terrible rim decision-making in Brooklyn and great today. 2 guys would come as a defender. They're passing the ball or turning around, kicking it out. All that combines to good ball movement, a lot of space to attack and keep that offense moving, and then space to get open from 3. And in total, made them look like themselves because they had space to operate and pace with it. And so many of their players, right? Kevin Bone and I didn't really talk about this yesterday when we were talking about the team struggles, but so many of the Pacers players made sense for them to keep or have been good in this system in Indiana because they're good in high-paced styles. I asked Obi Toppin and TJ McConnell about that after the game, right? And they were both excellent today. They combined for 34 points. I don't want to get into too much individual performance-y stuff in this first segment, but part of the theory and the hope for the Pacers of having this pace in this space is their players who were signed and added to play this identity can look better. And that certainly happened in this game. And I think those two are the most obvious two, but Haliburton looked good and Nembhard looked great. And even guys who are maybe better, air quotes, in not as fast environments were still good in this game. And that's all a testament to them playing their style, look like the way they want, with that pace, with the spacing, with the right timing for all the cutting. It all just gelled and flowed a lot better. And I think that's how they were able to get the shots they want. You can obviously and should say, I already said it, they were hot from deep, no doubt. 18 for 29 is unbelievably good. But they got great looks. Like, it's not like it's insane that they made the shots they made from 3. They might have had 2 challenging threes drop in this game, right? They earned good shots that they can make. They obviously, with as many points as the paint that they had, were doing well to get to the rim, pressure that area of the floor to score. And when you play paint to great, the Pacers' motto from last year at times, this is what your offense can look like. And so that's why this game not only was good because of what happened, they won, right? Even though all the stuff I've talked about happened and players talked about it, some players did in the locker room talk about just the will to win and how much that was important to the Pacers in getting this one. So going forward, assuming that will to win remains, the key takeaway from me in all this great offensive process night for the Pacers, is that something specific happened to make it get to that point. It wasn't just fluky, random good night. It was, we dialed back and focused on these things and suddenly played much better. And I covered the Fever this past season, and they started 1-8. And they kept saying as a team, their schedule early in the season was pretty hard and demanding with a lot of games. They kept saying as a team, we just need practice time, right? When we practice, we'll be better at a lot of this stuff. And I've covered sports for a while, and I kind of hated when they would say that. I was like, that's stupid. You're pro athletes. You don't need practice. Like, you're just playing bad. But then guess what happened? The Fever had some practices, and they played great. They finished the season 20-20, meaning they were awesome for their last, 31 games. And so I'm not saying the Pacers are just going to be better because they have practice time or because they had this long shoot around. Although Kevin Bowen did talk about practice time yesterday when we were running through the team's early season outlook and struggles. But I will say it's possible for a major practice moment or something just clicking and sticking from a session like that to be a turning point where stylistically you get back to your roots and principles. This has to sustain for more than one game for this to matter. Otherwise, I'm just talking out my butt. But what I do think is fascinating here is they had a moment of shoot around to practice, whatever, where they really locked in and focused on something. In this case, their offensive spacing and principles and speed and style. And it immediately translated to a game. Carlisle said not only was it a long shoot around, but they were really focused as a unit. And that will happen when you're 9-14, right? If this is something they can, either by continuing to rehash it or just by muscle memory or whatever, if this is something the Pacers can continue to do stylistically, they're not going to shoot 62% every game from three. But if they can get open threes and get shots at the rim and defend well enough for even just one quarter that offensive style gets them across the finish line, they'll take it, given how their season has started. That would not be like a major improvement from last year, but it's a major improvement from their first 23 games this season. And that's why, as my camera tips over on my computer, that's why this game stands out to me so much for the Pacers. Both because they won and they needed that and they scored a bunch of points and their stars were great. And we'll talk about that in a second. But their offense looked alive and looked like the Pacers from last year, scoring a bunch of points because they played like last year's Pacers by focusing on it in this session. And I think that this can be, I'm not saying it will be, let me be clear, this can be an important moment for them. Charlotte, Philly, New Orleans is their next three. They already lost to two of those teams, but they also they lost all three of those teams. Wow. But they also beat New Orleans once. They can win all those games. Every time I've said that, they've done terrible in stretches like that, but they can win all those games. But more importantly in those games to me, if they go 2-1, but all three games, they look sharp and crisp and fast on offense, and they're able to get into the 120s again, this could be a very pivotal turning point kind of night in Chicago. We'll see if they actually do it, because that's been a big problem for them. Sustaining good things. Their 3-game win streak, no one thought they were playing well. Their only other 2-game win streak, they actually did play well for those 2 games, and then immediately kind of fell back to earth. That was the Orlando win and the Dallas win. So sustaining has been a problem for this team. They need to do that going forward. But the start of doing something you want to sustain is actually doing it. And tonight they did it. They smoked the Bulls. Their offense looked good. Their shooting looked good. Their pace and rhythm looked good. They were moving the ball. They had a lot of balance. I want to talk about balance and some individuals who stood out to me for one reason or another to close out this weekend Locked On Pacers before we talk about any of that stuff, though. I really want to talk to you guys about FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action. Games coming up soon, or the NBA hoops with FanDuel. They are America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers on FanDuel can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. How about that? The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of a game, it happens to everybody, you can check out the latest stats from the action. You can go look at live play-by-play to see what's going on and be as informed of the moments coming, and so much more, right on the same page where you place your bets. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is on FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Back here once again on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Bulls. Not sure if they're going to do a weekend episode, but Hayes, I believe, just had a birthday and is covering a Bulls team that's surprisingly fun. #1 in offense for the 7 games preceding today. They did not play great today, but they shot the crap out of the ball and have shot 50% from the floor like every game for a month outside of this one. The Pacers actually did do a good job walling off the paint, I thought, at times. They didn't defend the three-point line very well, but only 42 in the paint for the Bulls tonight. Really early, I thought that was noticeable. I put that in my notes that the paint battle was favoring the Pacers early, even though as the game went on, that sort of evened out. So I talked about that stuff in the first segment. I just lost my train of thought. What also stood out to me, and this will lead to talking about individual performances, was the balance of the Pacers. This was a superpower for them last year, especially after Haliburton's injury, was they had nights where they had a ton of guys between like 15 and 25 points. Tonight, they had 6 of them. Turner with 15, 17 for both Toppin and McConnell, 19 for Mathurin, 21 for Siakam, and 23 for Haliburton. So that's a lot of their best offensive talents, all hitting a stride in terms of scoring. Plus 8 from Nembhard, who only played 21 and a half minutes, 7 from Walker on 50% shooting, and 5 from Johnny Furphy on 100% shooting, right? Accuracy helps, but they did a great job of everybody chipping in. And that was my takeaway from the first half of this game when the Pacers were up double digits at the break was they were winning because their offense was great. But you could point to every single player who played and say, this guy did that well, and that guy did this well, and this guy did these 10 things well. And that's how they were ahead. That maintained the whole game. I'm not saying they haven't had balance this year, but it's certainly been less than last year. I think that's undeniable if you've been watching this team play. And, they don't get me wrong, they've had superhero games. They don't beat Boston without Siakam. They don't beat Dallas without Haliburton. They don't beat New York without Mathurin. They deserve those wins. Those players were excellent in those games. But this team is at their best when they play like tonight, right? With a couple of guys, their best players, stepping up in the scoring department in some way along the way, right? And that's exactly how this game looked. To me, balance is the key for this team. If they keep the ball moving, 33 assists tonight, there is a limit to how much ball movement actually helps you. But if they keep it moving and play with balance and pace and spacing like they did today, they look great. And I think balance will be something I'm monitoring in future games and not just one guy taking things over. Okay, let's talk about some individuals who were great for one reason or another and why that could matter. I think Obi Toppin's week has been huge for him specifically. He was not the best player for the Pacers tonight, but he was in that second half against Toronto, at least a lot of the time. And this is, again, I had nothing to do with this. This is just coincidental timing. This is right after I talked about how his on-off numbers are just brutal. And he hasn't had a good year. The shot hasn't been falling. His defense hasn't been as good. Since then, 7 for 10 for 16 points in Memphis, 6 for 10 for 15 points in Toronto, 13 points on 5 for 11 in Brooklyn, 8 rebounds against Memphis, 9 against Toronto, 5 against Brooklyn, and then another good game today where he has 6 for 8 shooting for 17 points, 7 boards, 5 assists. He is a much better passer in the open floor. Caitlin wrote about this, Cooper. It was excellent. I think this is obvious watching Obi, and I talked to him about this after the game. I asked him about it, and he kind of made it a team thing, which is the right thing to do. He is much better playing in faster environments. And so the team getting their zip back really matters for him looking great. Lo and behold, today, they get their zip back. They look a little bit more like last year's team. And Obi Toppin looked very good. Very effective. He could battle in the post with other centers, Jalen Smith, ex-Pacer, being one of them. He got open from the shots he likes. He just looked really good. I think that's a big deal for this Pacers team that happened. The other player I asked about this, who answered more about himself and the team, was TJ McConnell, who obviously plays better on fast-paced teams. He'll say it straight up. And I think that was why I said the extension for him made so much sense, was because for a Pacers team who wants to play fast, open floor, tempo, Tyrese Haliburton style, it's very rare to find a backup point guard who can do that. And TJ McConnell can. And tonight was a reminder of why that's the case. Now, all these things sound rosy, and the team hasn't been good enough to get these rosy feelings about free agency decisions. But McConnell, up-tempo game tonight, 8 for 14, drilled a 3, 5 assists, 2 steals, 2 rebounds. His energy was vital in this game. They closed with him because he was so good, right? And some of that's that Nembhard was out, but him closing, something Alex Golden and I talked about on this show, or at least playing with the starters more, seemed like such a natural adjustment. And he was awesome in this game. That group was very good in this game. He was +6 in a 9-point win. Very needed game from McConnell and Toppin. And so I start with those two, not because they were the best 2 Pacers, although 2 bench guys combining for 34 on accurate shooting is very impressive, but because they specifically benefit the most from the Pacers getting to their style, and we saw that tonight. One more bench note, Furphy and Walker were good to find, they played their games. Good stat night from Jarris, 7, 5, and 4 with no turnovers. Furphy made both his shots. That's great. Those guys played well and were on the floor. Furphy with his 2 best consecutive games ever. The thing about the bench today is they turn to this group of McConnell, Furphy, Walker, Siakam, Toppin. That is a lot of fours. That's a lot of power forwards and McConnell. McConnell, the only real initiator in that group. Siakam can kind of do it, right? More so for himself, certainly. Toppin, a finisher for sure. Furphy, a finisher for sure. Walker can put it on the floor a little, but that's a very one guy is going to do a lot of the work kind of group in terms of who's taking up the floor and setting up the plays. That group looked good to me. That's a lot of size without a center. That's as much size without a center as you can get for the healthy Pacers right now. I thought that group looked really effective and very interesting. They definitely had down moments where they can't create, that they're going to struggle, but the skilled size they have allowed them to defend well enough to get over that. And of course, McConnell having such a good game let them defend well enough, score enough to look good as a group. I don't know if they can go to that permanently because of the offensive limitations it has, but I thought as a unit, it was really, really effective in a way that perked my interest. I put it in my notes for the game and my sub patterns it's colored. So that means I wanted to revisit it at some point. So really interesting wrinkle from Carlisle. Turn to that. It worked very well. The actual best player for the Pacers was Tyrese Haliburton, who had consecutively good road games on this trip and looked in general pretty good. The thing that's so interesting to me that I've been thinking about with him is that, obviously he's been way better at home and on the road this season, right? That's been talked about. But in his career and life and what I've seen of him existing, he traditionally is better on the road, even if it's slightly, not because of anything in particular, but because for a guy who looks for little things to motivate him or loves the entertainment part of basketball, getting into it with fans is fun and a big deal for him. And so when there's a guy in a flannel shirt in New York or some screaming lunatic in the front row in Cleveland, Haliburton's sweet, let's go. Let's do this, right? Last year, he shot better from three on the road by almost 5%. Almost 5%. Better field goal percentage on the road, right? True shooting percentage, 2% better on the road. He played very well in both locations. His assist numbers were about the same, but was a better, just barely, road player, right? And that's an unusual thing. I think most players would say they're better at home. But 2 years ago, the year he, came to the Pacers, similar-ish stuff where his road numbers slightly higher true shooting percentage. And so that's what's been really interesting about this year is that it's been so the opposite that everyone's saying, oh, he's just broken forever. I thought that was dumb because we have a huge sample size of him not being like that. I thought the same thing with the home road stuff, that eventually it would bounce back into place. Still a huge gap this year, but a good road trip for him, I think, is going to shut some of that talk down. In fact, I probably won't even bring it up again unless he does. But to have the 30-pointer in Toronto, not a super efficient night, but a pretty good game in Brooklyn where they actually won his minutes. And then tonight, where he was once again effective shooting, 5 for 9 from deep. He skipped after one of them, which is how I knew he was feeling it. 8 assists, 4 rebounds, 2 steals, +5. He was great. 38 minutes of Haliburton gave you 23 and 8. It's very good. He was excellent. Andrew Nembhard, much better than last game, only 1 turnover. 8, 6, 4, and 2 steals for Nembhard. Exactly what they want from him when he's filling in as that fifth starter. He played into the third quarter. I thought that was very noteworthy as well, with the one game Sunday and then a big gap of time off for the Pacers that they got a little more Nembhard. I wonder if they can get him for all 4 quarters before that time off. Myles Turner was great in the first half of this game. The most underrated player on the Pacers in the first half of this game. He was 3 for 7 from the field. Meh. He had 7 points. Meh. People will say meh. 7 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 1 steal, and 1 block in the first half for Turner. They were +9 in his minutes. For the night, he went 6 for 10, 3 for 5 from deep, 7 boards, 4 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks, only 1 turnover, +9 and a 9-point win. Myles Turner was good at the stuff he's usually good at and some in this game. And that extra add was huge. It made him really effective. I thought he was really good at chipping in just about every way in this game, even though he only took 10 shots, which was the lowest of the starters who actually played major minutes in this game. Siakam and Mathurin, we know what they are. We know what they do. They score. 21 for Siakam with 7 boards. I don't know if the Pacers are good enough for my argument that he should be an all-star to land, but he's been really good all season. Mathurin with 19 and 6 boards. He's a great rebounder for them as a guard. They need it. This game was super hard to get to the line. You had to really earn the free throws, 12 each for both teams. So that kind of held him back from a much bigger night. He was drawing a lot of contact, but still a good 19 and 6 night for Mathurin. He was +9 and a 9-point win. So everybody chipped in their own way, and that's what the Pacers need in a time like this when they're 10 and 14 and need to win any way they can get it. But the story, of course, to me, really from this game and the whole trip, Haliburton had a good road trip. Not perfect, but good. The team won a game where they looked like themselves from last year. They still have a lot of work to do to be consistent, but potentially a night to remember for the Pacers after two just horrible games that have people talking about the quality of this team. And they need to keep it up. If they lose the Hornets at home, who cares? Forget this Bulls game. Who cares? And we'll talk about that game Sunday night after it happens. I'll be there in Indy. Thank you guys for listening today. Hope you enjoyed this weekend bonus show and the Pacers winning a game and actually playing a little better. Back Sunday talking Pacers Hornets. Till then, everybody have a wonderful day.